but looking at the front of my building with glass shot out and glass shards all over the place from the attack, I said to myself that I personally can't say never again for what happened to me, because to me it's yet again.
So for people who have been with the vigil since very early this morning, Eastern Standard Time, thank you for being part of this. I'm Dr. Lauren after Bairnsfather. I'm director of the Holocaust Center of Pittsburgh. The Holocaust Center of Pittsburgh connects the horrors of the Holocaust and anti-Semitism with the injustices of today. Through education, we empower individuals to act with moral courage, to build a more civil and humane society. I am founding co-chair of the Together We Remember Coalition. In the months before the pandemic shut down the world, I began to work with David Estrin and Kiel Majewski and Together We Remember to form a coalition of Holocaust centers and museums to create joint programming, to go from strength to strength. Never did I imagine we would find ourselves connected around the world 2 years in a row now as part of this movement to promote genocide awareness and to unite organizations and individuals actively engaged in the struggle against all forms of identity-based violence. And for everyone who's been through the first 17 hours, we're now in hour 18, you are seeing such an incredible thing happening all around the world. In each of the previous hours, and now we're lighting a candle. And to me, and Rabbi, you'll forgive me, this evokes the Ner Tamid of Jewish tradition, a flame that burns eternally. And I have a candle here. I'm going to light the flame. You should be able to see it. Just looked at this. Can everyone see the flame? Right. I'm going to put it to the side, but it is burning brightly. So now you are joining us for a conversation between friends. Rabbi Jeffrey Myers and Ivy Schamis and I will discuss our commitment to Holocaust education and what each of us has learned from Holocaust survivors. And I'm going to expand that to survivors of other genocides, lessons and messages that stay with us in our everyday lives and in the actions that we take. We'll also discuss what it means for Rabbi and for Ivy to be part of a club that no one wants to join as survivors of attacks in Parkland and Pittsburgh. Today, we're welcoming you to become part of our story. And it's an incredible story of relationships that have blossomed out of tragedy. And Ivy has built many beautiful relationships in the city of Pittsburgh. And Ivy, I hope we'll get into talking about what you've done with our JCC here and even where our language from Parkland to Pittsburgh comes from. And first, I want to begin by inviting the Rabbi and Ivy to introduce themselves. And I'm going to be like the MC here, but really the three of us are in a conversation. So Ivy, I'll come right to you.
Okay. Thank you so much, Lauren. Just a quick introduction is that I am an educator. I teach social studies, or I taught social studies for 2 decades at Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School in Parkland. And in 2014, I founded and created the Holocaust Program at our school. It was a year-long, it still is actually a year-long academic elective to introduce Holocaust to students who might not know anything about the Holocaust. It's a very large suburban high school with a diverse population, 3,500 students, and we created a course out of nothing. There was no funding, but we ended up with 8 full-time classes of juniors and seniors who were extremely interested in not just the Holocaust, but genocides across the globe, past and present. And we really built up an excellent program. And the whole idea behind that was to make our students into upstanders.
I'm so happy to be with you, Ivy, and I'll tell everyone that I was able to visit your class at Marjorie Stoneman Douglas and what an incredible experience that was for me. We'll get more into what has connected all of us, but Rabbi Myers, please.
Thank you, Lauren. A pleasure to be here with all of you. My name is Rabbi Jeffrey Myers. I'm the Rabbi of Tree of Life, Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. On October 27th, 2018, during Shabbat services, a gunman entered our building. When all was concluded and the dust settled, 11 worshipers were slaughtered on that fateful day.
So, as I said at the beginning, this is the thing that unites us. And by inviting Rabbi and Ivy into a conversation during this 24-hour global vigil, what we're doing is sharing with everyone the kind of beautiful relationships and friendships that grew out of tragedy for us, and how, we've seen how the world is connected, and now we can see like the personal relationships that grow up out of tragedy and allow us to educate, and as Rabbi and I often talk about, create hope out of tragedy. So we had occasion to speak not that long ago, and we were recording. When we stopped recording, we started to talk about our relationships with Holocaust survivors and the survivors we've gotten to know in our lives, and what lessons we've taken from them and bring with us. So I thought we would each take the occasion to share some memories. And so I'm going to reverse order a little bit, but Rabbi, can you share with us a story of a Holocaust survivor, or more than one, and what that relationship has meant for you?
I would say first, I never totally understood all that being a survivor was about as a Holocaust survivor. And having been a teacher of Holocaust education for a very long time, since I also have a master's in Jewish education and have run religious schools for most of my pulpit career, there was always some aspect of my understanding of what it meant to be a survivor that I never truly understood. Then, alas, came October 27th, and I'm a survivor, and I can finally now say I do get what it means to be a survivor, not to the severity of Holocaust survivors and the horrors that so many of them went through, but I do understand now in a way that I never did before. So that being said, I've had the privilege of knowing so many Holocaust survivors over the years, each of them in a unique way with a compelling story to tell that you just sit at the edge of your seats. You admire the bravery that they had, that their families had, and the fact that they're still here to tell that story, to me is just incredible power, incredible inner strength to be able to get up and yet continue and continue and continue to tell their stories. I wish I say I had one that's a favorite. I really don't, because it's such a vast collection that I'm really hard pressed to pull out one and say that, but I can honestly say every experience I've had with a Holocaust survivor, be it just in conversation or hearing their stories, for me is a personal treasure, something that I continue to value and I continue to look forward to. And even if any survivor that I may hear their story more than once, I'm fine with that, because I continue to hear it reinforces it, and it grows, and I learn something new about them each time. So I wish I could say I had a favorite. I don't have a favorite. All of them to me are all favorites in that regard.
Ivy.
I agree with the rabbi. The Holocaust survivors are treasures. When I think about the Holocaust survivors that I've met over the years, it fills my heart. I love them so much. It makes me want to cry because I think of all the ones that we've lost recently, but I agree with the rabbi. I was embarrassed a little bit to be called a survivor, which I didn't tell my story, and it's too long for this particular panel, but my Holocaust class, my fourth period Holocaust class on Valentine's Day 2018 was ambushed by a former student with an AR-15, and 2 students were murdered inside my classroom at Marjory Stoneman Douglas High School that day. And it just happened to be during the Holocaust class. And originally we thought maybe we were targeted because we had a hater coming into the class, and we didn't know that at the time, however, but come to find out that it was random. But I always gained my strength before the shooting from Holocaust survivors. Anytime students would complain, they would be, we know, think of what the Holocaust survivors would go through. And so we would never complain about anything. If it was too hot or too cold or the kids were hungry or they had to go to the bathroom, we thought of our survivors because they were incredible inspiration. I could tell you for hours about all of the survivors that we've met and brought into the classroom, but I will tell you that I draw strength from the ones that really had the best outlook on life. Three come to mind. They happen to be all males, even though I love my female survivors. Armin recently passed away. He had the best outlook on life. He came to my class. He loved the students. He was adorable. Joshua, I met, he lives in Los Angeles, but he came to me when I was visiting Los Angeles and told me his story. He's 90 something years old. He drives around in his plumbing truck all around LA. In fact, he was recognized at the State of the Union address a couple of years ago. But my favorite, and I hate to say favorite, but is Leon Chagrin, because I visited him the most. I felt almost like a daughter to him. He had no children, and he went through hell and back. And he's still alive. He's 95. He's amazing. I speak to him all the time. And he was married to Betty, who was a Schindler Jew, who has an unbelievable story herself. But I think I took particular interest to them and them to me because they were unable to have children, and they outlived all their friends and all their family. And so I feel like his lifeline connection. So I would say Leon Chagrin. There is a book about him called The Horse Adjutant, and it is on Amazon, and it's amazing. So thank you for letting me tell everybody about him.
Just as we were talking about that a couple of weeks ago, I thought how lucky all of us are to have known many Holocaust survivors. And I had my first job at the Holocaust Memorial Museum. It was in the 1990s, not that long after the museum opened. And there were hundreds of Holocaust survivors who volunteered there. And I met one after the other. And I knew I was lucky. So I can't say I didn't know how lucky I was. I did know. There are a couple of stories that really stand out to me. And one of them is that there was a survivor who was there often, although he lived in Baltimore. His name was Leon Bretholz, and he's no longer living, but Leo, I'm sorry. Leo Bretholz, and he has a book that's called Leap into Darkness. By coincidence, one of our wonderful volunteers at the Holocaust Center posted a memory of teaching that book yesterday. And so I started to think about Leo, and our connection was that I worked in the photo archives at the Holocaust Memorial Museum. I found a photograph from the transit camp in France, Drancy, and I could tell that it was Leo, even though he was a teenager in the photo. And I shared it with him. Now that I know a lot more about trauma, I know that that was probably not the best thing to do, or that I could have done it in a more gentle way. He was grateful and happy. He used it in the second print of the book, but I definitely traumatized him by sharing that with him. And I mean, these are the kind of lessons that have stayed with me as we continue to do this work. And especially now that I'm in a city where the community is still experiencing a lot of trauma. But he was so incredible. And later in life, he was part of the effort to get the French rail company to take culpability for their role in the Holocaust. And he was just an incredible person. Leap into Darkness is his book. It's an incredible story of escape and escape and escape, one after the other, that leads to his survival, including jumping from a moving train, thus the name. And the other person that I absolutely have to mention, although I'm with the Rabbi and Ivy that you can't pick a favorite, but I have to remember Magda Brown, the incredible survivor from Skokie, who flew here on October 27th, 2018, so that she could give a talk to the community the next day across the street at Chatham University. And I have felt since I met Magda, since that very day, picking her up at the airport the afternoon of October 27th, that she is whispering in my ear, encouraging me to keep going. The quote from her that day was, "Now it's more important than ever, let's go," as she boarded the plane to fly here at the time of the attack. And I hear her saying, "Let's go," pushing us on to continue in all of our work to rebuild, all of our need to continue to stay resilient. And many, many people knew and loved Magda, and I really think of her every single day. So a long-winded response, but this survivors have been a part of my life for more than half of my life. So as we're involved with our incredible community in Pittsburgh, lucky to still have Holocaust survivors here, that commitment is deep inside me and true. So all of us have heard people, and it's really an anti-Semitic sentiment that isn't it time for Jews to stop utilizing the Holocaust and move on? So let's talk about that for just a moment. We're going to talk about a lot of other things, but I hear that a lot. It's so offensive, but I want to hear your thoughts. I'll go to Ivy, who is a devoted Holocaust educator.
How can you say that? I mean, we're moving on. We're not moving on. We're moving through all of these things together. We're including. Unfortunately, there are many other Holocausts or genocides that we're also teaching about and discussing and reading about and learning from, hopefully learning from, but we're learning from history. It is impossible to say, let's move on. This is what happened. We're taking a good look at it because these things are, as you know, and I know it sounds like a cliche, but they're happening again. They're happening again. I turned on the news the other day. There was just anti-Semitic acts at a synagogue in New York, everywhere, in Europe and everywhere. It's impossible to say, let's move on. Let's talk about it. Let's have these discussions. Let's teach about it. When I was in the trenches of high school, the kids really knew nothing about not Holocaust and not only Holocaust, but all these other tragedies. Now we see that Biden is recognizing the Armenian genocide. We had, luckily, David Estrin brought in a Rwandan genocide. The students had never heard about that. The key, and I know we'll get to that, but the key of all of this, let's just move on, is education. It is impossible to move on without learning it from the past and what happened in the past. So I disagree with the let's move on. Let's move through it, all of us together, as we learn about what happened, because there's no way we can advance unless we learn from all the mistakes that's happened in the past.
Rabbi.
Several thoughts come to mind in addition to the beautiful answer that Ivy gave. Part of me says, I'd love to move on, but the rest of the world won't let us. How often do each of us see on a daily basis imagery of Nazis, be it Nazi flags, salutes, behaviors, Camp Auschwitz t-shirts, references by politicians that are so horrific that they defy description. So part of my answer is they won't let us move on. That's why we need to continue to teach it, because it's still a regular, daily part of our diet. But we can take control of that and use it appropriately to educate the rest of the world about the horrors of what humanity is capable of. We thought that we'd seen the worst with World War II, with the epitome of a blot, a stain on humanity being the Holocaust. Yet we continue to see genocide, crimes against humanity on a daily basis throughout the rest of the world. So the reason we can't stop is because the world hasn't stopped. It would be a wonderful thing to say, we can stop because the world has finally figured it out. Until that day, we cannot stop.
Yeah, I've been known to say, if I can work myself out of a job, that will be a real victory. If this job is not needed anymore, we'll really be where we need to be. This gives me a chance to talk just for a moment about the other survivor I was thinking of, whom I got to meet recently, and that's the author Immaculée Ilbejiza, who is a survivor of the genocide against the Tutsi. The Holocaust Center put on the play Miracle in Rwanda with a local partner, Prime Stage Theater. The play is based on Immaculée's book, and I got to interview her. And we talked about Holocaust education. Surprisingly, she brought it up. She said that when she got to the United States, which was in 1998, and of course the genocide was in 1994, so 4 years after the genocide, she arrived here, she heard never again for the first time. And she heard it in the context of Holocaust and Holocaust education. Well, at first she was angry. She hadn't learned about the Holocaust. And of course, she had had this experience. So she knew like, genocide has happened since the Holocaust. But what she said in our interview was, if we had learned about the Holocaust, maybe it wouldn't have happened. She actually said that to me. I mean, even remembering it is making me feel, chills. So there is power in teaching about the Holocaust, and there's power in telling it not as a Jewish story. That's what makes me really angry, but as a human story. It fits in Jewish history, but it just fits in human history, right? So we still have much teaching to do around the Holocaust. But sometimes we feel like we're preaching to the choir, right? We're talking about this at the conclusion of a month of programs for genocide awareness. And our audience, people who are tuning in for a global vigil during Genocide Awareness Month, how do we bring people in who maybe are not hearing the message and don't know that they need to be open to it? I'll go to Rabbi first.
That's always the big question of preaching to the choir. How do you reach the people who don't belong to the choir in any subject? Part of that is that it doesn't start in the public schools. It starts at the kitchen table. Children learn from their parents and their family. So when I say around the kitchen table, that's where you learn and that's when you hear, and that's where you adopt the attitudes of who you are to become as a young adult and as a full-grown adult. So the question becomes, how do we get to the kitchen tables to initiate these conversations? What are the values that we bring to identify why these conversations are important? So until I have an answer for that one, part of my answer is that we need to ensure that we have Holocaust education be mandatory in every state in the United States, but not just have it mandatory, that the resources are made available and that there's follow-up so that we see that every school system in the United States, public, private, are teaching Holocaust education because of the things we spoke about in the previous question. So while I don't know right yet, how do you get to the kitchen table to do that other than one family at a time, obviously, I do believe that Holocaust education is a necessity. So when we have STEM education or STREAM education, we need to put the H somewhere in that phrase that Holocaust education must be part of the education of all people throughout the United States, if not around the world.
Ivy.
Definitely. Oh, definitely, Rabbi. And the resources are there. That I've seen them. I started the Holocaust program with what do I do? There was no precedent for me in my school, and I didn't know how many students would sign up. I didn't know what type of students would sign up, and it was fantastic when I saw all the kids that were interested. I don't know. We start out the class. What do you know about the Holocaust, and what do you know about genocide? I don't really know that much. Maybe they read Night in 10th grade, but when I started exploring all of the resources, it's incredible. I think the key also, the kitchen table, and then once it moves into the classrooms, it needs funding, but it also needs teacher training, because sometimes the teachers want to teach it, but they just don't know how, or they don't know enough about the topic. And so there are great resources out there, so many different technological resources as well. But I think that that just the training has to be out there to how are we going to get it to them, and how are they going to know, where they can seek it. And so I think that was really part of the issue that Never Again Education Act finally passed, because we know that there is a need for Holocaust education. The thing that's very interesting to me is that you would have thought that it's saturated. There's tons of books out there, and there's so many films, but it's unbelievable how much keeps coming out. And like you said, with your play, there's local plays, and there's dances, and there's fine art movements, and dancing through Auschwitz was one of the was one of the original plays that came to my school. Just there's so much out there. I think you have to be aware and you have to look for it. And again, when we say preaching to the choir, there are a host of students that have no idea that's where ghetto started, and that's, you know, and they have no idea that about any of it. So it's I think it's getting it from the, like you said, Rabbi, from the kitchen table to the schools. But once it's in the schools, there needs to be some kind of uniform or proper training for the teachers, because I think the desire is there. I just think they don't know how to do it. That's what I think.
So this is a prompt that gives me a great chance to talk about what we do at the Holocaust Center, because one thing that we think is really important for getting to people who are not yet in the choir, we can have a really big choir, and I'm excited about that. Let's keep building it. Is that we do school programs and we do community programs. And we've done recent community programs that really opened up our audience in a huge way. And Rabbi, we did this together, the Athletes Against Anti-Semitism programs. And what that does is it brings people who are not Jewish, but care deeply about fighting anti-Semitism and have a public platform already, you know, onto the small screen at this point, at some point in person after the pandemic. And it just brings a whole new audience to understand why it's important. And it's a chance to see people of different backgrounds talking to each other about things that matter, saying, if we're against racism, we should also be against anti-Semitism, and making that argument and articulating it so clearly that it becomes undeniable. So that's what I think about the community answer, is open up this conversation, get many more people to join it, clearly articulate how these different forms of H, as the rabbi would say, are connected, and how if you counter one, you can also counter others, and you should. That's the public programming part of it. The other part of it for schools is something that anyone who's been tuning in for this whole vigil will have seen, and that's the Light Education Initiative that was started by a teacher from Pittsburgh, Nick Haberman. And so what we're doing there is we're embedding Holocaust, genocide, human rights education in schools, and then it goes from the school to the table. So it goes in the other direction, but it still goes home. So the parents now are hearing from the students this broader perspective. And so, I mean, we have these innovations and different ways of looking at it. And I think we really could get there with this. I am more hopeful than ever that we have an approach that's going to work. I mean, after many years of saying it and still not getting through, still having people say, when are the Jews going to get over talking about the Holocaust? Right? So
I'm sorry to interrupt you, but you are 100% right. We've had many students come and say, my parents are interested in what I've been bringing home, or what I'm watching, or what I'm reading. They want to read it too. I've had emails from parents. We've also had kids that come in and say, oh my God, my dad is such a bigot. Like they never realized the things that their parents said that were anti-Semitic, which is quite interesting. And they then taught their parents. That's not what upstanders are all about. You're absolutely right.
So, I mean, we've seen tremendous student leadership through this month of programming through Together We Remember. And it's pretty amazing what happens when you give students the platform with the support of the educators. And you know, students are incredibly energetic and creative and able to use technology in ways I'll never be able to imagine. So we're seeing a real movement happen, and I feel like it's just like give the platform and get out of the way is my role in that. So I'm optimistic that we have potential to really make change, significant change that we need to see. So now I want to talk about how we all know each other. And I love this. And we've come to know each other through different paths, and now they're all converging, and I'm so excited about that. But first I want to thank you, Ivy, for reaching out to me. I mean, in the days after October 27th, 2018, you were in touch with me, and you connected me with other people in Parkland. And all of those relationships, I have to say, in the first months, when as head of the Holocaust Center, all I was doing was responding and responding and responding. Those relationships were nourishment for me. So thank you.
Of course, it's all about networking. It really is. It's all about networking. And our shooting was February. of the same year. And in October, so many people reached out to us. The support was incredible. And I know what it's like to be bombarded. And when I looked up, there must be a Holocaust Center in Pittsburgh, and I found your name and said, I'm going to email you. I didn't know if I would get a response or not. And you did. And so it turned into a great friendship, and I'm super thankful for that. But I wanted to not just reach out as someone who was who survived a shooting like that, a mass shooting, but also as a Holocaust educator. I was so thrilled when you wrote me back. And then when you said you would come to my school, we made a connection to the Pittsburgh community, and that's where I met Rabbi Myers. We visited Pittsburgh, the Parkland community, some parents who lost children in our shooting. Myself as a teacher, a few community members, and some students made a trip out to Parkland, and we connected with the Jewish Community Center. And then we had like a memorial service, and that's where I met Rabbi Myers under the tent by the Tree of Life. And then after that, the Tree of Life, I think, I don't remember who the person was, reached out to me and asked if our students would create some artwork to be posted around the fence of the Tree of Life. So all of those connections, and some of our students connected with your students from Pittsburgh, and they made lifelong friendships. In fact, one of the students, he's a Muslim student from my class, came with us to Pittsburgh. He had, I don't know what his direction was, but he really didn't think about Penn State. And since he kept in touch with the students from Pittsburgh, he now attends Penn State with the friends that he met from Pittsburgh. I don't even know if you know that.
I did not know that.
Yes, and it was not even in his radar. He didn't know anything about Penn State. So our connections to you will be forever, I think forever.
And Rabbi Myers, it's well reported that you came to Pittsburgh not that long before October 27th, but you were here and we met before through your commitment to Holocaust remembrance, right? So everyone who's watching us has heard how deeply invested you are in Holocaust education, but you made an effort right away to reach out to the Holocaust Center. And so we were connected to you. Yes.
Yeah, it's always been an important component of who I am. So within my earliest days of moving to Pittsburgh, I was intrigued when I saw information about a program. I don't recall what the program was at the time, forgive me. There have been so many there.
There have been.
I can't keep track. I don't know how you do.
Barely.
So
very good stab at the center.
I'm going to just go down there, introduce myself. I'm the new kid on the block, and just get connected. And it's grown ever since.
It has, and I was able to spend some time at Tree of Life. Judah Samet's 80th birthday, other events that we did together. Judah is a very well-known locally and beyond Holocaust survivor. He's the survivor who was at the State of the Union and everyone saying happy birthday to him a couple of years ago. That was memorable for sure. And I know that you're very close with Judah, Rabbi Myers. So we were also connected to Tree of Life through programming together, definitely through Judah and other people in the congregation. So the relationships just build and strengthen. And Rabbi and I knew right away that there's a connection between the Holocaust and what happened on October 27th. So our work together has deepened and continued after that, for which I'm really grateful, Rabbi. So thank you.
And so am I.
Really, really incredible. So everybody who's watching us now can see really the friendships and the relationships. And I wanted people to see that, because I think when we hear about events like our community experience, like the two of you experienced too closely, we don't see the side of the people who were there and the people in the community and the relationships. And this, just as we humanize through introducing people to Holocaust survivors, we're humanizing our communities for people who are watching this program. So you get to know us and you understand, how we continue, how we carry on.
I think the motivation too to reach out to you was from a Holocaust survivor. And I use this all the time, and I tell everybody, and it's passed on, and all my students know that a Holocaust survivor, when I think it was a student that asked, how do you find the willpower to keep talking about your story? And the Holocaust survivor, and I forgive me because I don't remember which one, we had so many come speak, said pain should not be wasted. And that always stuck with me, because if you feel so much pain and you internalize that, no one will ever learn from that. And here we are, if we reach out to each other, we reach across the table. I don't care what background you come from. We're all part of this whole, we all believe in human rights. I have to believe that. And so the pain should not be wasted. We are learning from it, and from whatever tragedy occurred between our communities and beyond. If we can share that, then we can all try to overcome that. And I think that's where a lot of my motivation came from, to speak out.
Yeah, and it's one more chance to acknowledge how the JCC brought so many people from Parkland here and how beautiful that was for so many of us. So, so props to the Jewish Community Center here that has done so much to keep our communities connected. I want to bring in another person to our conversation. So at the very beginning of our program, I talked about my work with Together We Remember and its founder and all around dynamo, David Estrin. David and Ivy go way back. So I just want to connect the dots between us because we're so interconnected in our world. So I wondered if the two of you could tell the story of how you've gotten to know each other.
Well, like most things, it starts with an introduction. I actually like forgot, and so I looked in my inbox and I was like, "How did I connect with you?" And it was Tracy Grossman from the Anti-Defamation League, who works with the local ADL in the state of Florida. And she heard my story and she was like, "You should meet this teacher." And there's this short email, and Ivy responded briefly and said, "Let's talk about Holocaust education." And then I think that led to a phone call. I found out you were going to be at my old Jewish day school one day, and we met up there. And then, I basically tracked you down. I was like, I need to meet this amazing person because I was at a point where I was trying to prove the concept for Together We Remember, right? I had witnessed the power of this concept of bringing people together across lines of difference in a collective memory vigil that didn't just remember the victims of the Holocaust. I mean, I grew up in Boca Raton, Florida, Jewish day school. We did the 24-hour or 10-hour, whatever, Yom HaShoah program. And I saw the potential of more inclusive programming in a way that, speaking of reaching beyond the choir, I think it's not just reaching beyond the choir, it's connecting the choirs that are not yet connected, if that makes sense, right? There are a lot of choirs out there, and for different causes that should be more aligned, right, to exercise allyship. And that to me is like the low-hanging fruit. And let's start with that. So I was trying to reach out to different schools, and I was like, I should probably start in my backyard, and that's how I connected with you, Ivy. And I share our story, and I want to ask you why you said, like, why did you even give me the time of day? I want to hear that. I'm curious.
Because you're adorable.
I just want to say one more thing, which is, I was in a moment where I was just trying to prove that there was demand for this type of programming in schools, universities, faith centers, all across the world. And Ivy said yes. And then the shooting happened, and it obviously hit close to home because I'm from nearby. And obviously I knew we had to take a step back. I had already worked with Susan Bro in Parkland, Susan Bro in Charlottesville. Yeah. And I had experience with being very sensitive and mindful, because Ivy, I knew that you were getting bombarded, and I knew that there would be a longer story for us, and we didn't have to rush it, but we eventually had our program, which we could tell that story in a minute. But Ivy, I'm curious, what did you think of this?
Well, a lot of people descended on Parkland after the shooting, but that is not how we met. We met before that, which is what you just said. I really, like I said, I had no precedent, and I felt privileged to be able to teach. I'm going to teach a year-long course in Holocaust education. What do I do? So I was very into networking. I reached out to someone knew someone at the ADL. So I was very interested in finding out, what do people know? How do I create this class? And so that's really what it stemmed from. And then I don't even know if I met Tracy. I think we just spoke on the phone from the ADL, and she knew you. And that's how we all start meeting each other. And then I introduced you to someone else, and then you introduced me. I think that's what happened. And so when you talked to me about that Together We Remember, it was intriguing, and you were just getting it off the ground. I think you were telling me about your grandparents being Holocaust survivors. It was so interesting to me. And here you were from from Boca Raton, and our school, if the people don't know that are watching, Parkland is right in the next neighboring town from Boca Raton. And so I was very interested in, and you also had that passion, of course, and I was feeling it. And so that's really what it was. And then after the shooting happened, I got very overwhelmed. And I know it was April, and a march for our lives was March, and then April, and it was a lot to put together in such a short amount of time. But the most meaningful program was when you came of April 2019 to my
Yeah.
school.
So what happened is, and I tell this story where when I speak publicly, like Ivy, you and your students are part of the story of Together We Remember because you signed up on the website to host a TWR vigil before the shooting happened, and then we had to postpone. And I remember vividly phone calls and conversations and text messages that we exchanged all throughout that time, which was very intense. We got through that, and then we did host the vigil, but the way we envisioned it is I flew down, we hosted a vigil in Baltimore, and by 7:30 a.m. the next day, I was at Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School with Emmanuel Habimana, survivor of the genocide against the Tutsi in Rwanda. And, he had been in a school during a massacre in Rwanda, and we thought, what would it, what you might not think on paper that connecting multiple survivors from different massacres would be a healing thing. But Ivy, you could talk about after that day, and we'll show a video briefly coming up here in a minute, what that did for the students. And for
I have the chills. I have the chills when I remember this, because there wasn't a dry eye in the class. I don't know if you remember. It affected them, and I'm sure still does. They talked about it for the rest of the year and beyond. It was just unbelievable. And you brought in a Rwandan survivor, and I know they heard stories of Holocaust survivors, and you cannot compare tragedies, and we weren't trying to do that, but he was extremely candid, and he was unbelievable, telling the story of the students, if any, had not heard about the Rwandan genocide.
So we're going to set up this video that we're about to share right now, and I want to invite folks who are watching just to pay attention to what happens when you give students a blank piece of paper that all it says on it is "Together we remember," ... and a prompting question: who, what, why, or how do you pledge to remember? And you'll see how the students decided to respond based on their own choices and in the context of Ivy's wonderful teaching in a Holocaust education classroom. So Logan, if we could cue up that video, that would be great.
So growing up, I was always wanted to know, what did we do wrong against the Hutus? It did not make sense to me. So today when I'm speaking, it's all those memories that I had to live through when I was young. These guys, we hear like the kicks in the doors and coming inside, and everybody's trying to squeeze and going in the soccer field. And there is nothing horrible like the sound of machete in the bone of somebody. My mind, I say, I don't want to be killed by machete. But somehow, because I was kid and short, I said maybe the bullet won't pass through.
Hearing this story, even though it was two different events that happened, obviously the Rwandan genocide and Stoneman Douglas, I saw a lot of my story in his, and I could relate to what he went through and the struggles and the pushing through and moving on, and I could just relate to the message that he was sending out.
Together we remember Olivia Engel, who lost her life in the Sandy Hook shooting.
Together we remember Martin Richard, and he was one of the youngest victims of the Boston bomb.
Together we remember Rachel Scott, who was killed at Columbine High School.
Together we remember Leopold Sosha, a Holocaust epicenter.
Together we remember Aaron Feist, a victim of the Marjorie Stoneman Douglas shooting.
We remember Hamza Mustafa, a victim of the attacks in Christchurch.
Together we remember Trevor Martin, a victim of gun violence.
Together we remember Cecil and David Rosenthal, brothers who were killed at the Tree of Life Synagogue.
Together we remember Anne Frank, a victim of the Holocaust who inspired millions with her words.
Together we remember Joseph, a Tutsi survivor who lost 30 family members in the Rwandan genocide.
Together we remember Joaquin Oliver, killed at the Stoneman Douglas school shooting, to keep the conversation of violence alive and to work to find peace.
Rising of the sun and its going down, we remember them. At the blowing of the wind and the chill of the winter, we remember them. At the opening of the buds and in the rebirth of spring, we remember them. At the business of the skies and in the warmth of the summer, we remember them. At the rustling of the leaves and in the beauty of autumn, we remember them. at the beginning of the year, and when it ends, we remember them. As long as we live, they live too, for they are now a part of us as we remember them. When we are weary and in need of strength, we remember them. When we are lost and sick at heart, we remember them. When we have joy we crave to share, we remember them. When we have decisions that are difficult to make, we remember them. When we have achievements that are based on theirs, we remember them. As long as I've lived, they will live too, for they are now a part of us and we remember them.
Especially younger folks. When I'm sharing my story, it's not a crazy genocide that happened in a really crabby, crazy African people. It's a humanity crisis. If it can happen to Rwanda, it can happen to anywhere. Maybe not from Hutu and Tutsi, maybe from other kind of differences.
Right, and actually, when you leave this class, you see a poster on the wall over there. Elie Wiesel said that when you listen to a witness, you become a witness. So
Absolutely.
we all just heard you,
Absolutely.
and now it's our responsibility to tell others about your story.
So now I'm going to just share the screen for a moment, and Lauren, let you just kind of speak to, just for a moment, just so folks can get a sense of what some of these pledges look like. Can you see them?
I see them, and we can just have them up for just a moment.
Yeah.
But you saw a bit of this from that video, and I've seen that video a number of times, and it really just hit me. I'm going to pull myself together here. But I wanted to tell this brief story that David and I and Keel met prior to any of these events in Pittsburgh or in Parkland. But we met through the Association of Holocaust Organizations. We were at a meeting together. It must have been June of 2019. It was a room of maybe 150 people. And David made a presentation and passed out the pledges from Parkland. One by one of these 150 people, they came up to me and handed me the pledges that had to do with what happened in Pittsburgh. And the power of this, the power of our collective memory, the power of our commitment to turning memory into action. So you can take that down. I mean, that we are so connected, and that your students, Ivy, pledged to remember the people we lost in Pittsburgh. I am so moved by it. It's really a struggle to even put into words the feeling that gives me. And Rabbi, I know that was very difficult, and I apologize for that. I was thinking about that before we did it. I feel badly about it. Actually, I'm sorry about that. But if you would respond to that, if you can, or if you would like to.
I mean, it's moving when you see students impacted, like the way they were, regardless of what it is that they're remembering. It's just very, very powerful. I mean, part of it saddens me that we have these things happen in the world that we have to teach students about, so that they are moved to act like that. I can appreciate what Ivy accomplished in her class by doing that, because personal testimony is so very, very powerful, and this is a perfect example of it. So, yeah.
Yeah, and I feel like it's so important to make clear, like, I was not there that day. I was at home. The thing that I did that day was pick up Magda Brown and her daughter Rochelle at the airport, while fielding a lot of phone calls from people all over the world who were worried about us. But it affected all of us in the Jewish community here, and well beyond that. So even going to these conferences for the Association of Holocaust Organizations, it was a lift for me. And everyone who knows me knows that I'm a very social person, and I thrive when I'm surrounded by people. But still, it was very emotional and difficult to be. I mean, the whole group came out in support of us. Everyone contacted me, our Holocaust Center of Pittsburgh, after that happened. But to receive copies of these pledges from everybody in that room, I mean, the connection between all of us was undeniable and so powerful. So
but without David Estrin and Together We Remember, people wouldn't know. I think people wouldn't know. And you brought that, David, to the world, and specifically to my classroom. And I don't know if I even thanked you properly for doing that. I don't. I know that we all take we're proud of it, but I don't know if I even thanked you for what you did.
No, you do, and the fact that when we were texting each other a week after, Ivy, I have this text that I will cherish for the rest of my life. I should turn into like an NFT as people are selling online, like this like digital relic. But that's I'll tell you what that means another day. But sorry guys. But you basically said that in paraphrasing, like my students came alive again, and they hadn't since the shooting. They didn't have this sort of zest for life until they met Emmanuel, and they just kind of woke up and the light bulb went on again. And I was like, this is it. This is what happens when you bring survivors of different atrocities together, regardless of the scope and scale. There's a knowing and an understanding, and then an electricity. So at the very first TWR vigil, what was unique is that we had survivors and grandchildren from all these different genocides, and when they met, they were full-on strangers. But they were immediately crying and hugging, and there was just something that they were able to exchange. And then when those folks are then able to connect with other people in a community, it creates a sacred space where anything is possible from a bridge building perspective. And that is why Together We Remember is what it's called. It's why we do what we do, and it's why the four of us here together have a certain level of power. And this whole 24-hour vigil that has gone from Hong Kong and is going to go to Los Angeles, there's some electricity here, and we're just continuing to build that community. And Ivy, we're building this network, and our job is how do we deploy it and continue to build it in the years to come. And we can't do it without you guys.
And if anyone had asked, how did the Holocaust Center become so involved with building this coalition and with Together We Remember, we were already talking. I was already interested in working with you, David. But that moment at that conference when everyone brought me the pledges was like undeniable. Like, we're doing something really powerful, and we need to. The idea of turning memory into action is so powerful, and that's what we've accomplished around the world today. And I want to close with the question that Together We Remember often asks people. And I've asked it of members of our board today because we're really digging into this idea. And the question is, what does never again mean to you? So I want to ask Rabbi first. What does never again mean to you?
I grew up with that mantra from the earliest days of being taught about the Holocaust to becoming a teacher of the Holocaust. But I have to share personal experience on a different meaning for me. It was roughly a month or so, not even a month later, where we had your Holocaust Center had a Kristallnacht event. You'll forgive me, I don't remember the name of the woman who plays piano. Did a one-woman show. Perhaps you remember her name?
Mona Golubeck.
Thank you.
Children of Williston Lane. Yes.
Yes. Thank you. So I came to honestly, I really didn't want to go. I just said I don't need more depressing stuff in my life at the moment. But I did go. I had a guest, dear friend of mine, a fellow rabbi, who was there he came to support me. So he was there. So we went. When it was done, I was asked to say something. And I'm thinking, well, what can I add? First of all, it was an incredibly powerful performance. And then I just addressed the whole idea. I grew up with never again. But looking at the front of my building with glass shot out and glass shards all over the place from the attack, I said to myself that I personally can't say never again for what happened to me, because to me it's yet again. So I don't use it. No disrespect intended to any other groups, because there is value in it. But to me, having lived through this, it was, because it was anti-Semitism, it was yet again.
Mm-hmm.
Ivy.
Very interesting. When the March for Our Lives kids mobilized very quickly after the shooting at Stoneman Douglas, many of those kids came through the Holocaust class. I had many of those activists in my class. And one girl in particular, Delaney Tarr, actually, I said to her, how come you using the never again? They were using the never again slogan as part of their activism. And I said, was it coincidental? And she said, no. We sat around thinking about the Holocaust class when we came up. They didn't come up with the slogan, but when they came up to use that as part of their mantra. And never again, just to me means, never again, no more injustice. I know that it seems like it just keeps happening, but truthfully, my slogan not only would be never again, but it would be never again is now.
I feel so lucky to be talking to Ivy and Rabbi and have David here while we're thinking about this, because this is, I mean, you can hear from the responses like how very deep a question this is and how resonant. I think of Father Patrick Dubois. I know that some people saw him earlier as part of this program. And he said, it's forever again. Because he said that genocide is a human disease. And this is what we're up against. This is what we're raising awareness about with programs all month long. We are so far from never again. We are so very far from it. And it's my sincere hope that through our efforts, we work toward it. And we strengthen each other and we strengthen each other's work. And that someday, and maybe not in our lifetimes, but someday we get there.
That's what we're here for. That's what I'm here for.
That's what we're here for. And so I think that we're at the end of our hour, which is hard to believe. Rabbi Ivy, I'm so grateful for your friendship and for your sitting down to have this conversation today. Rabbi and I are working on a number of things that we're very enthusiastic about. We know that together we will be connecting people. We will build bridges in our city of bridges. And I'm just so grateful to everyone for your friendship and for being along for the work.
Thank you so much. I will never give up hope, ever.
Thank you, Lauren. Thank you, Ivy. Thank you, David.